Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. You're listening to a new Redefining Security podcast. Have you ever thought that we are selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Perhaps we are. So let's look at how we can organize a successful InfoSec program that integrates people, process, technology, and culture to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And just we are live here on ITSP Magazine with good friends, old and new. Great to see many familiar faces and a new face. And I think everybody kind of knows each other from the medias, the socials, if you will. Thanks for everybody for joining us live today for a new Redefining Security episode. Special edition. We don't go live. We normally don't do video. We just dig in on audio podcasts. But I want to do more of this, and I think not necessarily event driven. Hopefully, not event driven like today's episode is about. But when important things come together, we need to talk about it. And today is no FUD, no BS, straight shooting. What's going on with log4j or log4j, as I like to fat finger it when I'm typing. But I'm gonna take a quick second and set the stage because I actually wrote a piece about this back when I used to write for TechTarget back in the day when I wrote for them, and as an independent journalist, if you will, back in 2013. And I was looking at mobile security and app security, and I watched a bunch of sessions at RSA conference and interviewed a bunch of people, and like folks like Chris Eng and the late Howard Schmidt, Eric Scow, Jeff Williams, Duna Dezovi, and then Twitter researcher Charlie Miller. I put this article together, and in there was a report. And in that report were some stats about reuse or open sourced libraries. And there was one that topped the list. Can you imagine which one it was? log4j. So this is something, and we were talking offline before we started, that, I mean, this is, nobody thought logging and logging libraries would be an issue, right? But it's become an issue. So I'm thrilled today to have this conversation. We're going to get into what's happened. Why does this matter? Where's the overhype? Is there overhype? What do we learn from all this? And I have Katie Nichols joining, Director of Intelligence at Red Canary, SANS certified instructor and former principal cybersecurity engineer at MITRE. Welcome, Katie. We have Alyssa Miller, Business Information Security Officer at S&P Global Ratings, and also the co-host of the Compromise podcast here on ITSP Magazine. Welcome, Alyssa. Eric Thomas, Information Security Analyst, SecOps Cloud Security at HT Supply, and he's also a cybersecurity instructor at Cover 6 Solutions. And last but certainly not least, Mark Nunnikhoven, a distinguished cloud strategist at Lacedwork. So welcome, Mark. That was a mouthful introducing everybody. Here we are, right?
Here we are.
Are we showing our week behind us in our smiles?
Do you see these bags?
Yeah, somewhere, yeah.
Somewhere are the wrinkles and the frowns. But all right, I'm going to kick this into gear. For folks watching and listening live, feel free to comment. We're on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook if you want to be there, and LinkedIn as well. Some of those we can engage better than others. YouTube is pretty good for that. Feel free to throw up some comments or questions. We'll kind of pay attention to that. Well, Alyssa, I'm going to start with you.
Right.
As somebody who you have a unique title. It's one that's growing in popularity, but it's business focused. So I want to start with, how do you as a business leader handle what's been going on, and maybe your perspective of this last week with log4j and what's happened? And I'm going to hear from kind of everybody's perspective on this, but I want to start at the business level.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been interesting, to say the least, partially because, trying to being that connection to the business now, trying to sell to them the criticality of this when they're used to hearing security tell them everything's a fire, right? Trying to come to them with a credible story to undo the sins of the past, if you will. Because I'm this role within my organization is very new. I'm just coming up on 1 year. So they're still kind of learning how I operate and stuff. But I told a number of them on the call, I said, look, you know me, I don't typically come at you with a bunch of fear and scare tactics and things. Like, this one has me scared. Like, this is really a big deal. Just like you mentioned early on, Sean, just knowing the prevalence of log4j. I saw something from my buddies at Sneak just a day or two ago that from their research, 90% of Java projects are using log4j. That's a big deal. And so, that's been a real big challenge, because it was, how do I spin these people up, get them to understand and give us the right level of focus and criticality to this without it becoming just another case of InfoSec FUD. And so, that alone has been a significant challenge. The other thing that's really been challenging and trying to temper it with them is there is a lot of frustration because the story keeps changing, right? First it was, just the versions of log4j that you need to have. First it was 215, then it was 215B, then it was 216, and now we're already hearing 217 is coming. And so, they're in there trying, they're doing the thing, they react well, they're fixing things. And then it's like, whoa, here we go again. So that side of it has been tough. Now, the last thing I'll say on this question, and I'll shut up and let other people talk, is we did have some cool stuff that really helped us from the security side. Like, we have an SCA tool in place. And so when this started coming up Friday, it was great to be able to go to that SCA tool, run a report and say, guys, this is everywhere you've got log4j in our environment. This is what we need to take care of. And here's how you prioritize it. Let's start with these because they're internet accessible and blah, 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 blah. We had all of our criteria there. And so for those of you that don't know, because I realize I'm tossing around, security acronyms like we always do, SCA, software composition analysis. So the aforementioned Sneak, White Source, there's a few others out there that do it too. Just, that will scan your software repos, identify the full dependency tree, all your dependencies down through all layers of nesting. So your dependencies of dependencies of dependencies get identified, and then not only find the vulnerabilities in that moment, but then keep that and alert you to new vulnerabilities. You'll also hear people talk about SBOM or software bill of materials. This is how you can build that software bill of materials in your own environment with code you've developed, is having a tool like that. So I will say, that alone was one thing that was really great, to be able to show the value of one of those things that security kind of said, you all have to have. Well, here's a case where it made our lives a whole lot easier because we didn't have to go hunting for log4j in our environment.
Eric, I'm gonna turn to you, because before we started, you mentioned we know how to deal with the bad guys and gals, right? But not necessarily something like this. And I always have the question: how much can we actually prepare for this? Can we build an SBOM and inventory all this stuff before it becomes a problem? And is it possible to allocate some risk level to those things, or do we have to wait for an event to then say this is a problem? What's reality?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'll go to the first question. We do have processes in place, especially from a SecOps perspective, where we're right there in it, right? We have these processes in place. We have incident response processes, have all of these different processes to deal with adversarial behavior and analyze adversarial behavior. It's an especially significant circumstance for security professionals all over, but especially in SecOps when one of the tools in the stack is, or these systems that you depend on every day is the vulnerability, is the weakness itself, right? And we were joking about it before, but it's like logging, right? Like as security professionals, what are we always talking about? Logging, right? It's like the building's on fire, save the logs, and so it's one of those things. But I think to Alyssa's point, the way we prepare is, this is me sort of taking off my SecOps hat and putting on my, security, business, and risk hat here. Asset management, right? Knowing what we have. Unfortunately, I talked to a lot of my peers and friends across the industry, and for lack of a better term, they were screwed just because it's like we don't know what's running on these servers. I mean, and when you're in a huge environment, right? We talk about our environment; it's huge. If you don't know, what servers are potentially vulnerable for this, right? You could be, there are people still working on inventorying right now, right? Just to find out, like Alyssa said, everybody's first priority was what's touching the internet. Let's get to that as soon as we possibly can. I had a buddy of mine who had to do it manually. They literally went through every server that was touching the internet because they're in the process of onboarding Seam, so they don't have it yet. But asset management is, and that's software assets, hardware assets, and understanding the environment. And Sean, you and I have talked before, like even as an analyst, about how important it is to know your environment and to know. One of the guys on our team found this because we knew what was in our environment, and we were fortunate enough to have pretty decent asset management. We work closely with our IT department and our IT teams. In some organization, it's just not that way. Alyssa alluded to it earlier. In some organization, InfoSec is the no crew, right? Nobody wants to work with InfoSec, not even other technical professionals, and certainly not the developers who, I don't think we talk about enough in this conversation. Certainly not the developers. They never want to work with InfoSec. So we were fortunate enough to have, I think that one of the things going forward that prepares us for this is building relationships across technical disciplines. All of your technical teams having a working relationship, from your InfoSec people to your network people to your devs. And I publicly on Twitter give the devs a lot of grief about throwing out insecure code, but I had to call a few of my dev friends and say, hey man, how you doing? How are you doing? And they're like, me? What about you? But yeah, we have to have this communication across the aisle. And asset management. We don't talk about it enough. It's in that same bucket with availability and site reliability, right? It's one of those things security people don't really want to talk about, but it's essential in situations like these.
Nice. And I'm going to go to Katie, and everybody can jump here in a second, but Katie, you first. Your perspective of the last few days is, you have a lot of experience in different areas, and you get to see a lot of things. And I think everybody here interacts, Eric just mentioned it, with their peers and their friends and their foes on social media. But you get a nice perspective across the board, companies large and small, and individuals dealing with this thing. Your personal perspective, and maybe a recap of some of the things you've encountered as you've engaged with some of the other folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. And thanks for having me here. Great to be here with you all. Been a long week. I can't believe it's been a week since this first was disclosed. Over a week now, I guess. A couple things. First off, I would agree with everyone. This is incredibly serious. But I think some of what I'm learning is that the InfoSec community, when we have something like this, sometimes I think we enjoy panicking a little bit too much. Panicking doesn't really help anything here. And so I think I've seen a lot of panicking and churning, and people feeling like maybe because this is a big deal, they have to panic. And if they don't panic, they're not responding correctly. That is not a necessary part of the incident response cycle. That said, I certainly understand it. This is widespread. I would say if there's any silver lining right now, it's that honestly, based on myself and all of the people that I'm constantly trying to keep up with and talk to across the community, is that honestly, the post-exploitation activity has not been that bad when compared to some other major vulnerabilities. So compared to like Microsoft Exchange, that major vulnerability in March, that was pretty nasty. There were web shells a lot of places. And I'd be curious in others' perspectives on this as well. From my perspective and those who I'm talking to, sure, adversaries are exploiting this. Coin miners, right? We saw some attempts to deploy ransomware, some limited ransomware activity on Minecraft servers, right? Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center talked about that. But I think the good news is that maybe the threats haven't started exploiting this in mass. So the impact isn't as bad as we fear it could get, which is a good thing because it gives us all time to get patched, to catch up, to mitigate when we can't. The other thing that I would say, you kind of talked and asked about, could we prepare for this? And absolutely, right? Everyone should have incident response plans. We talked about SBOM, software bill of materials, and Katie Masouras, another Twitter friend and colleague, she said she was watching, and I should give credit to her. She kind of helped me adjust my thinking in that, right, software bill of materials are helpful, but maybe before that, and Alyssa made the same point, maybe we just need some kind of inventory. But what I would say is think about, right, SolarWinds, that was almost a year ago, been a long year. We talked about SBOMs and inventory after that. And what I would offer is that it's so easy for all of us to say, just keep your stuff updated, make sure you have an inventory. Sometimes the basics are not easy. And I think that's what we're discovering is that as much as we as security professionals say these things are so important, having an inventory, patching, have an incident response plan, that stuff isn't easy. And so I'm sort of left with, right, when we're through this, figuring out how do we help people do these basics that are so foundational, maybe in a better way.
And Mark, your perspective, and I'm going to ask you to kind of point this in a direction of line of business owners, engineers, people playing around. They spin stuff up in the cloud. They launch new apps that are fun and skunkworks that turn into real things. How do we manage that in parallel to what the others have said, where you can't panic, right? So there's stuff out there we don't know about regardless. So how do we balance those two things?
Definitely, yeah, and when Katie said that we need to focus on the basics more, and that I can't agree more, right? And I think that the problem is that we in security love the 0 day, we love the advanced attacks, we love that interesting stuff, but it's professionally interesting, but I think also it's an area where we have more control, whereas asset inventory, working closely with the line of business, that's reliant on other teams outside of our own. And it takes consistent effort, consistent communication. It's a long haul to get there. And sometimes we just default to the easier, even though it's more technically complex. And this rolls right into what you're saying there, Sean, as far as people spinning up stuff in the cloud, just experiments, different different tools they're running, different open source stuff they're running. That's almost the best scenario, because as Alyssa was mentioning, you can use the compositional analysis, you can scan your repos, you can check your templates, you have a better chance of knowing what's running there through some automated techniques than what I've been dealing with this week, talking to a lot of people, some off-the-shelf stuff, a lot of IoT stuff, a lot of enterprise apps where when you talk to the business units, they're like, yeah, I run XYZ. And you're like, yeah, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about what that's built on. And so even if you get the names of the tools these people are using, then you need to go do the research with the vendor to figure out, okay, what is there, or you need to try to scan it. So I'll give you a concrete example. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in bioinformatics, and all of their lab equipment, all this big sequencing stuff, $500,000 machines, they're just Windows boxes, with a bunch of other cool stuff attached to them. But a ton of this stuff is written in Java, and surprise, surprise, it's all got log4j built into it. But nobody can touch that box because it's under a maintenance contract. They don't have admin access to any of this stuff. So you can risk like hot patching it, and you can try to put some mitigations around it. But it's sort of this long tail that's really a huge challenge. I'm just reassured by what Katie said, because I know we're seeing the same thing from our data, is that post-exploitation activity isn't that bad yet. It's mainly just finding out what's there. But this long tail is kind of scary because that won't hold up forever, right? Someone's going to figure out a way to leverage this into a much more significant foothold. And we have to figure out how we can get to that other stuff to patch it and put other mitigations in place to protect the rest of the business. And that's just a lot of grunt work.
So let's talk about that. And whoever wants to jump on this, and I'm sure all of you have some perspective here. So don't panic is what I'm hearing. It's easier said than done, right? Yeah, that assumes you have some first step in mind, whether it be the right one or not. What are those first steps? Because Alyssa, you mentioned it was what I can't remember the numbers 215 and then 215B and then 216. So patching sucks in general. How do you do it 3 times? And is that the last one even? So is that the right first step, or is it some other mitigating controls, or what is it?
I mean, I can share what we did, and it was you take it and you have to, it is that idea. Don't panic. You have to look at it systematically. Our look at it Friday was, what's the very first thing and quickest thing we can do that will reduce this risk? And so there were some, mitigating controls we were able to quickly implement, and we knew they wouldn't be perfect. I mean, and that's a big concept that security misses. We have to understand nothing is perfect. We talked about SBOMs and stuff. Your SBOMs, your asset inventories, they're never going to be 100%. They're never going to be a replacement for, we're going to have to at some point search our environment to make sure we don't have this thing anywhere we didn't see it. But, when you come back with a big report of where for sure you have it, well, that gives you a place to start in the meantime. So I think it's having that methodology to just, first of all, say, all right, let's look at the things we can do right away. What do we have the technology in place to do? For some people, it might have been that they had, WAF technology, and they were able to get, a lot of the WAF vendors, web application firewall vendors, were able to provide you with immediate, I know AWS had it, Akamai had it, a few others had it. Very quickly, they had signatures and they started updating them as variants came out. So that was something that someone might have been able to do. For others, it might have been, hey, you know what? We don't have that in place, but we can control our proxy and we can shut down outbound traffic because we know this thing has to be able to connect to the internet outbound in order to be effective. So where can we shut that down or severely limit that? Even if we can't turn it off completely, just turning off, obviously LDAP going out would be a great one to shut off, because that was the first, big exploit we saw was Jindy over with LDAP. So, there are things there you can do, but it's just identifying what that is. For some orgs, it might have been just, hey, we got to shut off our internet connection. If you're in a space where, maybe that's business expensive, but it's not going to destroy you, maybe that was what you had to do. But it's looking at it and then just have that plan of how do we progressively build out, to use the buzz term, defense in depth, right? And just keep adding to your defenses until ultimately you can do the primary mitigation, which is that code change in many cases to replace that library. Because that's going to take some time. So that it's different people that do each of those things in a lot of orgs. You got devs who are going to do that part, but you might have SRE or somebody who can manage those proxies or the WAF or whatever else.
Yeah. So I like what you said there about just kind of patching, or stopping the bleeding. From an ops perspective, our first approach is always right, limiting the attack surface, right, and containment. So I know for ops teams, that was the primary mission. After you had a lot of once the threat intel teams, validate, okay, hey, this really is a thing, because that's another thing, right? With threat intel, Katie said it, security people panic. So one of the first things we had to do was validate this thing, right? And luckily, I think and Alyssa and Katie and I follow a lot of the same people. I think we may be on the fun side of security, because I saw more memes than I saw panic, which was really, really cool. But security people are going to panic. So you have your threat intel validate that this is something, and they want to move quickly, right? And so when we're talking active threat intel or an actor that may be active right now, maybe they'll give the thumbs up to go ahead and start taking that IR action at 70% versus 100% if this is an active threat, if something that we think is active, right? But once you do that, you want to, first of all, get an assessment and an idea of what your attack surface is within your environment. This is where I'm going to say it again. Maybe we can do like a drinking game every time I say asset management, but this is where it comes in, right? What is our threat landscape? What's vulnerable? Do we know what's vulnerable? do we need to go with sort of a break glass approach? But for ops teams, it was containment. I can tell you, for us, this unfortunately, the threat intel came in around, in the afternoon, like around 3 or 4 on a Friday. You guys know what that means. I don't have to say it because my boss may be watching, but you know what that
party
means.
Time. Party time.
Around 3 or 4 on a Friday, everybody's, and then we get this, and it's just like, oh, okay, threat intel guys are still working. I'm gonna get ready to head out soon. And then it's just like, then you see that good old, Teams window comes open that, that says P whatever, and you're just like, yep, I'm done. But for ops teams, it was containment all the way. And so I think going forward, one of the lessons that ops teams in general can take away from this is, how well, I want to make sure I say this the right way. How well you're nurturing that relationship and communication between other technical teams, because for some people that I saw responding to this, the language of it was a barrier, right? Critical to the security team means this could be exploited. This is an active vulnerability that there's no patch for right now, right? Critical to the networking team means outage. Critical to the business means the e-commerce site is down. We're not all sharing the same language. So I think going forward, we should definitely have some sort of shared communication. But to Katie's point, most of us have IR plans, and in those plans, the very first step is going to be after identification. The very first step is going to be containment, and then we work from there once we get it contained.
Yeah, Eric, I think you said something that was also a challenge for a lot of orgs that I talked to: communication. In any incident response I've ever been part of, the communication is the tough part. For example, right, we had a comment from Frank and watching online about, right, them learning that certain systems they were running end of life versions, right? Log4j version 1, not version 2, which reportedly wasn't vulnerable to this specific vulnerability. And so one of the things that's so tough is just getting accurate info, validating that info, and then communicating that, right? So Frank's team would have had to figure out, oh my God, log4j is vulnerable. Where do we have log4j? Cool, but then get into the details, right? Look at the documentation from Apache, from MITRE, right? From NIST on these CVEs. What is it actually vulnerable to? And there has been so much confusion throughout the community, right? And Alyssa mentioned this as well, just in figuring out what freaking versions are vulnerable. And that's changed constantly. And so, right, again, this is something for later, but even now, orgs hopefully are getting into a good communications tempo, right? Where they have a plan. Maybe it's every day we update the executives, but that communication is absolutely key and a huge challenge.
Yeah, and to that point, Katie, and actually one thing that Eric was saying, as far as speaking different languages, one of the things that I find that we've accepted as sort of normal in security is that this is going to change as it evolves, and it's going to change constantly, right? So I mean, we saw that Alyssa called it out with the version numbers, which I don't know how you keep track of them, because it's it just keeps, every time I open my email, there's another one coming. You're like, oh, here we go. But I mean, and it's the same thing for attacks. We've been seeing, the research community has been seeing different attempts and different, so we saw the initial really simple string, and now we're starting to see string escapes and different things to get by those controls. And in InfoSec, we're sort of used to that basic functionality of, okay, we have one way of identifying it now, we know that's going to change. But we just assume it, so we don't talk about it. And that, I think, comes back to your point, Katie, around communication, is that one of the best things you can do in any of these processes is make it crystal clear to everybody that you don't have all the information, and that new information is going to be coming in constantly, which means the situation could change, which means the decision we make right now may not be valid in an hour from now because something changed. Now, hopefully it's not that bad, but like that is just a basic thing that I think we've internalized, but then fail to communicate out to the rest of the people, and it causes so many problems because of that.
Yeah, so I want to jump in on the conversation about returning to basics, right? Because this is something I think bears more discussion in the security world, because there's no doubt that the basics are right. There's a reason they're called the basics. But I think part of what we need to also acknowledge is how we as InfoSec people can be better about communicating that. Because let's face it, we've been talking about what are the basics for at least the 2 decades I've been in security. So, and I actually brought this point up yesterday on Twitter when Chris Inglis shared out the White House's statement on, not even related to Log4j specifically, it was how to, avoid being breached over the holidays. And you read through this statement, it's the exact same things we've been saying forever. It's, patch your stuff and do, cybersecurity awareness training and use MFA. And I'm just sitting there reading it like, we've been saying this forever. Nobody's listening. And then he tweets it out and he says, well, my hope is that now organizations will start to make these a priority. And my question back to him, and I'm sorry, Chris, I know I was kind of snotty about it, but legitimately, like, why now? Why is it going to change today? Because Log4j happened? What happened when Equifax got breached? What happened with SolarWinds we mentioned before? It didn't change, right? So, it's really incumbent on us in the security sphere to figure out our language better. Katie caught me before when I was tossing out acronyms and just assuming that everybody knew what they were. And yeah, y'all didn't know that, but Katie's the one who woke me up and said, hey, stop doing that. But seriously, I mean, that's important. How do we talk about these things in a way that isn't just, well, you must do this to be safe, but encourages our business leaders to actually want to do these things? Because at the end of the day, we need to get them to invest in it. And so I think as we think about the basics and things that seem basic to us, don't seem so basic to others. And they seem like really big challenges that cost a lot of money and don't return revenue to them. So we need to start changing that mode. And that speaks a lot to, I think what we've been talking about here, a lot of this, how do we get to that collaboration and more of that true, dare I say it, DevSecOps model where like everybody is working together for all the same shared purposes, not just security as a shared responsibility, but total shared responsibility. Those are the kinds of things that we've really got to start to embrace. We need to lead that charge from the security team.
So quick comment I think you're absolutely right. And I think Sean and I have talked about this before. For when we talk about communication and collaboration, right? I think it requires, I think I'm going to lose some followers. It requires us to work with the business. It requires us to stop doing this. Yeah, sorry, I just lost like 200 followers. I didn't have that many to give, So anyway, it requires us to work with the business. Nobody wants to hear it. It's like, oh, the business, all they care about is money. Well, it's like, well, guess what? You should too. You're protecting their money because their money somehow through all of this stuff winds up in your pocket. So we as security professionals, and I don't like I cover my ears when she said DevSecOps because I'm like, no, but in our reality, we have to find a way to work with the business. And I think it starts, one of the things that I train analysts to do is to learn the business first. Before you touch any security tool in the stack, you need to be able to tell me, if I give you a host name, you need to be able to tell me what team owns that host, who the point of contact is, where it's located geographically, and and who the ServiceNow assignment group is, because you need to understand the business. And I think that helps with communications. Naomi Buckwalter talks about this all the time, right? Of just being more friendly, right? Showing up to meetings. I'm sorry, security professionals. We show up to
somebody said show up with donuts.
Show up to the meeting. You know what I mean? Show up to the meeting. When go to CAB. Oh, that's another 200. Go to your change advisory board meetings. Go, because you need to be in there. And maybe don't say no on your first meeting, right? Like maybe go attend a couple on time, maybe camera on, maybe put a smile on, and then you can start to say, hey, I really want to see us get this done for the business. Instead of saying no, say, let's talk about how we can reduce risk. So, when we talk about changing language, sometimes it's about changing the language that we use to talk to others. And Sean, to the point of this thing, like the whole part of it is we got to stop using fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right?
Yep.
And we have to do it. Journalists within InfoSec have to do it. And, the media also has to stop selling it this way because it makes it difficult for us to be able to work with others.
I love that you brought it there, Eric, because it's in the title, right? No BS, no FUD, but there's plenty of it out there. So I'm wondering, is there a single source of truth that people can look to? I know we kind of latch on to social media and the people we know and love and respect, and I've even seen threads where somebody I know is going off like way off the wall with some of their comments. I'm like, okay, I'm not sure how that's helpful. So how do we, starting with the basics, looking at the language we use, the steps we take tactically, translating that to how we communicate the importance of this and the program that we're going to put in place to address this with the business? There's a lot to unpack there, but how do we find a single source of truth? Does the media have a role in that game of presenting that single source of truth? Or do we see, vendors, but do we see a lot of that driven by vendors with a clear objective to ambulance chase? Or I don't know. Thoughts on any or all of this? Anybody?
So yeah, as a vendor, I'll jump in here and then I'll punt it to others. Got bad news for you and everyone, Sean. I don't think there is a single source of truth. It sucks, but one thing that I've been telling people is to trust but verify, right? Use the original sources. Go to your go-to sources. I've shared out things from Microsoft. I trust their threat intelligence center. They are excellent, right? I trust the MITRE CVE site, the Apache site. It's probably going to change, but I trust that source. It's so easy. I've seen so many things over the past week where people are like, someone on Twitter said this. And right, I said, even if it's me tweeting, even if you don't trust this tweet, don't trust it, but don't trust random people you don't know. I know it seems really basic, but get to that original source. And what is okay though, and what I've been doing and what others have been doing, use Twitter or an RSS feed or media sources. I do think the media has a role in this. Use that, aggregate that as a tip. Hey, someone said that it looks like there's a new version, right, that might be coming out. What's the source for that? Oh, it's something on GitHub. Let me go look at the original source. Right? Very early when this first came out last week, first thing my team did was try to reproduce it, right? Double check. Hey, there's a proof of concept. Does that proof of concept actually work? Right, know your trusted sources. And this, I would even say this should be part of your incident response plan. Know the sources you can trust, but as you see these tips, go back to the original source, verify, validate it yourself, because otherwise you're going to be spreading this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is the whole goal of us being here, is to avoid that, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm so on
point.
this right now.
Perfect point. Yeah. Sorry, I was just agreeing.
Everyone's excited.
Yeah. Well, because first of all, how many of us in I'll pick on InfoSec Twitter for a minute. How many of us are out there, complaining all the time about all the misinformation on social media, all the misinformation about elections and dissing on people who buy into that stuff? Do you want to know how much damn misinformation I saw on Twitter from security people proclaiming to know the answers about log4j? This came out and early on, people were out there talking about how log4j 1x had the same vulnerability. No, it doesn't. So what does that do? That's damaging to this exact relationship we're talking about with our devs. So you go to the devs and you say, oh, we got to get rid of all versions of log4j less than 2.6 because they're all vulnerable to this. Well, then suddenly they're not dumb. They go and they look at the library. They go into the repo and they look for the commits and they see when was Jindy added. Oh, Jindy was added in 2.0. Why do I have to fix 1.x? And now you've lost all of the credibility you had and you lost your ability to motivate. So, I know people who are using this to motivate the replacement of 1.x, but the smart ones aren't doing it by saying 1x is vulnerable to this thing. It's got this other thing with JMS appender, I understand, and we found that later. But the reality is you can use this to your advantage without lying or spreading misinformation. There's just this weird thing, like everybody wants to sound like they're the expert when one of these things happens. Like, just how long would it have taken one of you security people who was screaming that log4j1 was vulnerable to the same thing. How long would it have taken you to go out to GitHub, look at the commits on this thing, and figure out when was Jindy added? Because clearly, if Jindy's not there, it's not vulnerable to this attack. Absolutely vulnerable to others, not vulnerable to this. So it was weird.
Yeah, and I think for me that comes back to, you know, what Katie was saying earlier, what we've all been saying is, you know, don't panic. Like, take a breath and, you know, go double check the sources. And you know, if the difference between, you know, 1 minute and 5 minutes is not going to be the end of the world in a situation like this, right? And it only takes 5 minutes to check those commits. And the challenge, and as far as single source of truth, like, there's a role for media because it raises awareness. And to be honest, even in the sort of, you know, the sensationalized media, I find the advantage is coming in as the pragmatist. So if your board's reading an article saying like log4j is the end of the world, it's not, for the record, for everyone watching, but like if they're reading an article saying this is horrible, you know, this Christmas is canceled because of log4j, that's an opportunity for company like, okay, no, here's our approach. We've planned for this. We have an IR plan. We've kicked it off. We've verified this. We've looked at that. We know things are going to change, and you walk through. And that is a great way to break through, you know, those barriers, like Eric said, as far as participating with the rest of the business. Coming in as the sane one is the last thing they expect from the security team. But it's a wonderful position to be in if you've taken that advice. You're not panicking. You're verifying those sources. And it is super hard because we get caught up in it, right? It's that emotional thing. And you're like, yes, okay, there's this stuff going on. We want to help. We want to share. But, you know, you see a lot of that damage. And unfortunately, it's easily avoidable, but we don't avoid it somehow. And then this has gone in over and over again.
So, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, you go.
So first, absolutely agree with what Frank said. See what your ISACs are saying. Absolutely. You know, in the threat intel community, we have trusted sources that we can go to. And I want to provide a different perspective. As somebody who, you know, made a transition into cybersecurity or InfoSec, you know, after having a career in networking, I got into the industry when we had things like Discord, right? So for me, Discord was amazing. I mean, Twitter was the place I went for all the memes, right? But Discord was where I went for help. And I think Alyssa made a point that I think is important for cybersecurity across the board. Everybody doesn't have to be an expert, right? I have no problem going on and say, hey, we talked about the pup that was going around in the different iterations of it. I went on Twitter and said, hey, is anybody seeing this? You know, that was the thing. It's why when you think about it, one of my mentors told me the reason we have things like Stack Exchange and why we have great answers, why we have a plethora of answers, is because somebody was brave enough to ask the question in the first place. Everybody doesn't have to be the expert. You know, I've never answered a question on a forum. Go to them every day because there are brave people who ask questions, and then there are other people who give good information. So, you know, definitely your ISACs. And you have to forgive me, Katie. Absolutely forgot what ISACs stands for. You know, it's one of those things with acronyms.
Information Sharing and Analysis Center.
There we go. And they probably have one in your industry. This is not a paid promotion for ISACs. But yeah, I think that, you know, as Katie said, using your tribe, your community, start there, or actually start with whatever your organization's formal threat intel process is. If you have one, that is, I think sometimes we take it for granted. That's very much a capability of a mature security program. So not everybody has one. But if you have one, follow that. And then from there, use your community, use your ISACs, and use those trusted sources. Because I think, I don't know if everybody else, I was sort of impressed at the way we sort of came together on this. I mean, like I said, for a lot of us, we're in the same sort of Twitter sphere. We came together really well on this. So yeah, I mean, use your tribe, use your community.
Yeah, and there's a comment from Matt listening in or watching online here, talking about basically just general awareness, right? Can we get folks who may not be aware or interested, perhaps, what vulnerabilities are and risk is? Do events like this help, or do they further promote the fear and panic and chaos? What do you think?
Really quick, if we use it to teach, it helps. If we try to scare them into thinking the way that we think, it makes things worse. I'm going to give a quick answer. I think Alyssa is probably better qualified than me to give that answer. But generally speaking, if we use it to teach and we say, hey, this is the sort of thing we're talking about, it helps. If we try to scare them into saying, this is why you should listen to us, or this is why we should have more access or more authority or more decision-making power, it goes the other way.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm actually just going to expand on exactly what you said, because you kind of went where I was headed too. And that is, this, by it left to itself, I don't think it will. In fact, actually, I think it'll be more damaging to how we handle this in the future, because you're going to have a lot of executives who are going to be looking at the expense that went into responding to this and everything else. And they're going to go hyper the other direction if we don't manage that narrative. So you're going to have those executives are going to look at it and say, well, we got to get open source out of our environment. We can't have any open source or silly things like that. And then they're going to hear back from the business that, well, if you do that, you're basically turning us off. We're shutting down at that point. And then nothing will happen. It'll be the age-old thing. So what's really important for us in the security world is to manage that narrative. And we have to be ahead of the game in that, right? I mean, like, we need to be the ones on the forefront right now to leverage the fact that we have an opportunity here to use this. But again, first of all, as Eric said, not with fear and uncertainty and doubt, not with, scare tactics and woe is us, not with, we're going to reduce risk by X, Y, Z. Because it's a great discussion, but it still doesn't motivate executives. What we need to do is take a very consultative approach and say, here's what we need to do to keep the business running and to keep innovation spreading and growing and doing all the things we do from a business, but still be able to address the security concerns that we ran into here. Here's how we need to address that. That's the narrative we need to bring from the security side. It's got to be business aware, because otherwise it just turns into the same story. And like I said before, with the statement from the White House, it'll be us doing the same thing again, just screaming the same things from the rooftops that we've already been screaming into the void for how long and getting no results. We can't keep doing the same thing. We have to be smarter about this.
And I think everybody has to go through something like this to know how to deal with something like this, right? So I'm going to bring it down as far as you want to take it. Technically, I think folks listening can handle it, certainly more than I can. But I'm here giving you the platform to help people listening. How do we cut through the noise, get past the FUD? What's real with log4j specifically in terms of what's possible in terms of the threat and the exposure that it brings? What is not possible that we've seen floating around that people may be trying to address that they shouldn't be? And if definitely want to look at log4j here, but if you want to open it up to general open source software, we can look at that. But let's focus on log4j first.
So
hey, real
I'll
quick.
kick this off.
Oh, sorry, Katie,
Yeah,
because
go
you're
ahead,
going to
Eric.
say something valuable. Somebody just texted me and said they think it's log4j. Are we saying that wrong? Do we have bad intel?
Oh man, we're not getting into this.
Okay, sorry.
My colleague Matt Graber is log4j. Like, he likes the French accent. I don't even
Somebody
know.
said it's
Fabergé?
log4j. All right. Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to derail it. I was just like,
Wrong.
Here we are talking about trusted intel and we can't even get the name right. Sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
It's all good. So what I was going to say is, first off, I don't think it's realistic to expect that everyone in the world is going to immediately patch this, first of all. So, I don't know how technical we want to get. I just brought up my colleague's notes because Matt Graber is my trusted colleague who explains how this stuff works. So I think what is true, right, that adversaries can have some adversary supplied input that will exploit this vulnerability. We know this. What I think the nuance we need to make clear to our consumers and stakeholders is that this is not single-handedly going to bring down your entire network and cause ransomware and stealing of data, right? These things happen as part of a chain. And so, yes, as Alyssa said, great advice. Try to mitigate where you can, try to patch where you can, but remember that, right, adversaries, after they exploit this vulnerability, there are going to be other things that they do after that, right? For example, there was a blog today from VK, Vitaly Kremenz, on Conti ransomware. and how, right, they exploit this vulnerability in vCenter to move laterally. I clarified with him, because Conti ransomware exploiting this sounds terrifying, that, right, that was actually in their lateral movement phase after the initial access, a bunch of execution, Cobalt Strike, other stuff that is the same stuff that we detect as ransomware precursors already. So I think that's one thing that maybe people just coming into this don't realize. Yes, this is the initial ingress rather, but it's not the full attack chain. So that's what I'd offer.
I want to, yeah, I agree. We we laugh about it, we joke about it, and there was a lot of talk about it. I think for a majority of the InfoSec community, we were talking about it so much because of the extra work we had to do. But to Katie's point, it's not the end of the world. This is if we're looking at it from a MITRE standpoint, this is potentially the threat there is initial access, right? There still have to be a lot of other things that happen before we get to exploit, or before we get to some sort of data exfiltration or action on objective here. So I think that's one thing. I want to get talk to the ops people specifically. Here is where we have to really start to think about the basics, right? David Bianco's pyramid of pain, right? Understanding what the IOCs that we're looking at, and figuring out what's valuable to build our operations around. From where I sit, detection was the name of the game once we were able to get containment. How do we detect this thing? And to what I think Mark was talking about, how this thing kept changing. I mean, the list of IP addresses, whoa. I feel bad for anybody who's trying to do this at at the firewall level. I mean, I'm sure firewall teams are still working, just because there was the list of IP addresses. So I think that you have to understand what this thing does. First of all, is it's not, if you're vulnerable, it's not as noisy going in, but they still got to get that reverse shell out of there, right? So that you probably have other stuff in place that keeps it from going too far, but you do want to use this as Alyssa said, go ahead and patch, go ahead and get things done. But this isn't going to and this is, I guess, where we come to the no BS. This isn't going to take down your tower, right? If you have other defense in depth in place, if you have other layers in place, right? Because like I said, this thing's super noisy coming back out. I mean, it's coming back out in clear text. It's super noisy coming back out of there. So I think that's one of the things where we have to sort of level set reality and really understand that this isn't D-Day for computers, right? Or maybe D-Day for Java. Won't give my opinions on Java because they may be watching, but we do have to be realistic, and we do have to get away from the fear. Fear is a tactic of communicating anything to the business and even to each other as technical professionals.
Yeah, I think, I just to echo part of that, I think the one of the challenges we constantly have as security professionals is getting an accurate handle on risk. So when we see a vulnerability like this, it gets rated with a CVSS, so a common vulnerability scoring system. I think that's what it actually stands for. The scores we assign to these things, with yet another acronym, because why not? When these two, exactly, just keep adding acronyms until people stop listening. These two ones were 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10. Now, the reason for that was because we were seeing them actively exploited, or at least people trying to do that, and they allowed remote code execution over the network, right? So they automatically hit these high scoring marks. But as we've been discussing, the perspective, is what are they actually doing with it? And the challenge is, when you look at risk is the potential impact of something happening and the likelihood of that thing happening combined together. We're generally pretty good in security about figuring out the potential impact, right? We have earned our tinfoil hats for a good reason. The problem is we're not great at the probability piece. And so we almost automatically assume this could be devastating, therefore it will be devastating, therefore we need to react. And as we've talked about here, yeah, it could be, but we haven't seen that yet. And so the likelihood right now is relatively low, which is a good thing. That gives us time to go through the motions, to go through the basics, to bring it back to what Alyssa was saying, to go through these basics and work with the business to actually mitigate or to fix the root cause of this issue. The challenge is communicating that and working through that in a logical manner. And I get it. From a risk perspective, we never want to leave holes open because you never know what could happen, right? Something bad could happen. And we've seen that repeatedly where in competitions like Pwn to Own, which is a researchers show up and try to crack the latest versions of a whole bunch of popular things. And if they do it, they get prizes, right? A great competition to encourage security research. But one of the trends we've seen over the last few years is that the winners have been using lower risk things to get bigger access. So instead of one big hole, they've been threading through multiple small ones because they were left open. And that gets in the back of our heads as security folks. And we need to literally force ourselves to maintain the perspective that when we show up, if we do show up at CAB, we're not the number one priority. The business is the number one priority. We're one of many competing priorities that needs to be balanced. And I think that's super hard to do because we're getting out of the technical side and we're purely in the human side. And that's where we all sort of fall down. So I think, to wrap this back to the original question, this could be bad. We've seen no evidence of horrific things happening, but it's a smart idea to close up this hole as fast as you can because the potential is there, but you have time. So go through the process, don't skip the steps, work those basics, and you'll get a good result.
I love it. Take the time. And speaking of time, I'm sad that we're coming close to the end of this. We have an hour. That means a few minutes left for those joining. I put up a comment from Frank. Only good Java resides in my mug. It's a bit funny, but I'm gonna. It was in relation to a comment Eric made. I think kick the Java.
I like you, Frank.
But I'm gonna play on this, and I'm gonna ask you each to comment on what I'm about to say as we wrap here. Java, we look at that and we all think technology, right? And in particular part of our stack. And I can say, okay, is that good? Is one element of that Java good and all of it? And then there's the rest of it. But that's all tech oriented. So from each of you, take this technology stack, operations, detection, protection, response, business. What's good? What's the good thing we can take from this conversation from this past week, given what we've experienced? Alyssa.
Oh, sorry.
So, all right. So I'll throw this out there real quick. Being able to actually recognize what's good. Honestly, this is something I think is really important. In security, we're always afraid to tell people when they did something right because we're worried it's going to cause them to get complacent. But you just had a whole bunch, if you're like me anyway, if you work in an organization that develops software, you just had a whole bunch of devs and SREs get all spun up, your change management people, everything else to address this. Look at what they did to address it. Look at what made things better, faster, easier, and compliment them on that. For me, it was, I mentioned SCA before, the fact we were able to get that report so quickly and they had that tied into their pipeline. The fact that their pipelines are efficient and well-structured enough that we were easily able to push tons and tons and tons of deploys across all of our different apps. Don't be afraid to tell them that. That's all good stuff. And the more you tell them that, you actually encourage them to do more of the good thing. So that's mine.
I say the good that came from this is learning to work together. Alyssa's point is almost exactly my point. You saw dev teams, you saw networking teams, dare I say it, you saw vendors, ops teams, the business all working together to make sure that we were in a good place. And as far as right now, I think we're in as good a place as any. So learning to work together, I think across different disciplines, I think was a big win for us.
Yeah, I think one of the good things is we knew about this vulnerability. Someone responsibly disclosed it. We were able to take action, right? And I think that, one of my colleagues commented, hey, at the end of this, log4j is going to be really secure code, right? And so a lot of people lose track of the fact that we're identifying these vulnerabilities and responding to them as a community is better than not knowing about them, as much as it sucks sometimes.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's really the fact that, this is, I can guarantee pretty much every professional has had a conversation with somebody they hadn't talked to before, right? And so it's opening up those laneways, which are super important. And sometimes it takes a forcing function like this. I wish it didn't, but sometimes it does. And you have that conversation, and I would say don't let it go to waste. Make sure you keep that connection alive because we do need to work together. We're all working towards the same goal. Whatever that goal is for your organization, you're all there for the same reason. You may have different perspectives, but yeah, I think that's a huge one. It's just that conversation.
I love it. I love this community. I love this group. Alyssa, Katie, Eric, and Mark, thank you so much. Thanks for those joining us online and actually contributing and participating in the conversation. Thanks to my co-founder, Marco, lurking in the background, helping me out here. Really good conversation, important conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned. On the show notes, we'll have some links for folks, linking to some things that I captured as I prepared for this, and I'm sure the host or the panelists will have some things to share as well. So thanks, everybody. Peace out. Stay safe. Keep well.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Security podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.